Gunpowder smells like sulfur and burned paper, but a hospital break room smells like microwaved grief and someone else's leftover ambitions. Reyes had learned to tell the difference between the two a long time ago, in a country whose name she had stopped saying out loud. She was refilling a paper cup of water from the dispenser in the corner of the St. Augustine Medical Center break room, when Karen, the charge nurse, walked in and looked right through her. Not past her, through her. The way you look through a window. "You're on transport today," Karen said, pulling open the refrigerator and scanning its contents with the concentration of someone diffusing something. "Second floor to radiology, radiology to 4 back down, nothing complicated. Try not to get lost." Reyes didn't answer right away. She drank the water. It was flat and slightly warm, and it tasted like the plastic cup it came from. "Got it," she said. Karen closed the refrigerator without taking anything from it and walked back out. The door swung shut on its pneumatic arm, slow and indifferent. Reyes stood there another moment, looking at the water stain on the ceiling tile above the dispenser. It was shaped roughly like the state of Florida, which she had always found darkly funny, though she couldn't have explained why. She had been at St. Augustine for 11 weeks. Long enough to know which elevator was slow and which one was unreliable in a different, more dangerous way. Long enough to know that Karen called her transport, even when she was doing wound care, even when she was reading a 12-lead EKG with more accuracy than the attending resident. Long enough to know that the 3 core nurses on the day shift had a name for the float staff that they used freely within earshot: fillers, as in necessary, disposable, interchangeable. As in, not really nurses so much as warm bodies in scrubs. Reyes was fine with that. She had chosen this exactly. She had driven past 4 hospitals between her apartment and St. Augustine specifically because St. Augustine was the one where nobody knew her, where her record showed only a nursing license in good standing and an 8-month gap in employment history that she had listed as personal leave and nobody had pushed on. She had chosen a hospital small enough that nobody was paying close attention, and a float pool assignment specifically because float nurses were invisible by design. She wasn't hiding exactly, she just wasn't being found. Her right shoulder ached in the cold of the break room. It always did in cold rooms. There was a small constellation of scar tissue there from a piece of fragmented metal that a surgeon at Landstuhl had spent 40 minutes extracting while she was still half conscious and arguing with him about whether she actually needed general anesthesia. She had lost that argument. She lost most arguments with people who had her sedated. She crumpled the paper cup, tossed it in the trash, and went to go move patients from one floor to another. The morning was long and uneventful in the way that only hospital mornings can be. Not quiet, not peaceful, but mechanically relentless. She wheeled a 73-year-old man named Gerald to radiology and back, and Gerald told her the same story about his fishing boat 3 separate times, and she listened to it 3 separate times with equal attention, because Gerald's story about his fishing boat was actually a story about his dead wife, Marlene, whose favorite thing had been watching him untangle lines at dawn, and Gerald was telling it to whoever would listen because the telling of it was the only way he could keep her close. Reyes understood that. She didn't say so. She just listened. She restocked linen carts on 4. She assisted a young nurse named Danny who was barely 24 and still had the slightly panicked eyes of someone who had not yet made peace with the weight of the job, with a dressing change on a post-surgical patient whose wound had not closed cleanly. Danny apologized twice for asking for help. Reyes told her once not to apologize and showed her the pressure technique without making her feel incompetent about not knowing it. Danny thanked her with a kind of genuine gratitude that people only produce when they're genuinely relieved, and Reyes filed it away under the category of moments that made the fluorescent lights slightly less oppressive. She ate half a granola bar in the hallway at 11:43 and threw the rest away because it tasted like cardboard. She drank more of the flat, plastic-flavored water. She did not think about Kandahar. She was very good at not thinking about Kandahar, the same way a person can be very good at not pressing on a bruise. It requires constant, low-level, exhausting vigilance, and it works right up until it doesn't. The vibration started at 1420. She felt it before she heard it. The floor transmitted it first, a low-frequency pulse through the linoleum and into the soles of her sneakers. She was standing at the nurse's station on the second floor, initialing a transport log, and her pen stopped moving. She knew that vibration. It was not a news helicopter. News helicopters were high-pitched and nervous. It was not the hospital's own rooftop medevac pad receiving a civilian transfer. Those she had felt before, and they had a lighter signature, a shorter beat. This was heavier. This was rotational weight, the kind produced by a machine that had been built not to be fast or clean, but to absorb punishment and keep moving. She set the pen down. "Do you hear that?" The ward clerk, a man named Phil, said from the other side of the desk. He was looking at the ceiling. "Yes," Reyes said. The red emergency line on the charge desk rang. Karen, who was walking past with a chart, stopped and stared at it for a moment like it had said something rude, then picked it up. Her face changed as she listened. It went from impatient to confused to something smaller and more frightened that she wasn't able to keep off her face fast enough. "But we're not a trauma. We don't have or capacity for." She stopped. Whoever was speaking on the other end was not interested in her capacity. "Okay," she said. Her voice had gone flat. "Okay." She hung up and looked at Phil. "Get Dr. Morrison," she said. "Tell him we have inbound. Armed military, multiple casualties, ETA 4 minutes. They're bypassing county trauma. Tell him to call the surgical team." "We're not a trauma center," Phil said. "I know that," Karen said. "Tell him anyway." The overhead PA crackled. "Code triage." The words came out of the speakers with the slightly artificial calm of someone reading from a laminated card. Reyes recognized the cadence. She had used that voice herself, once, in a different context, reading coordinates into a radio while a man bled through her hands. The floor began to shake. Not metaphorically. The building itself was vibrating now, the loose ceiling tiles rattling in their frames, the IB poles on their wheels trembling and rolling slightly of their own accord. Somewhere down the hall, something glass fell off a surface and shattered. The sound was swallowed immediately by the growing thunder from outside. Reyes moved to the window at the end of the hall. 2 HH-60 Blackhawks were sitting in the hospital's visitor parking lot. They had taken up the entire east half of it, the rotor still turning, the downdraft flattening the small row of ornamental bushes along the perimeter fence and sending a plastic lawn sign advertising the hospital's new cardiology wing tumbling across the asphalt. There were men on the ground already, moving in the way she recognized, the way of people who had made tactical movements so automatic it looked almost casual, the way of people for whom urgency and stillness existed at the same time. She stepped back from the window. She was not going to do this. She had made a decision, very deliberately, 3 years ago, after the things she still did not say out loud. After Landstuhl and the surgeon and the general anesthesia she had lost the argument about. She had made a decision to put the weight down, to stop being a person who picked up the weight because she could. The weight was heavy. It had left marks. She was 31 years old, and she had marks that most people did not get until 60. And she had decided that the people who needed her skills in the particular way that weight required were going to have to find someone else. The elevator doors opened. They came through the lobby entrance, which she could hear rather than see from the second floor. A controlled crash of doors, shouted commands, boots on the ground floor tile, and then the stairwell door 20 feet from her burst open, and 3 men in tactical gear came through it moving fast, carrying a stretcher between them. The man on the stretcher was unconscious. He was young, mid-20s at most, with the particular leanness of someone who had been training hard for years. His left arm was wrapped from the elbow to the shoulder in a pressure dressing that had soaked through, the dark stain spreading. But that wasn't the thing that stopped Reyes where she stood. The thing that stopped her was his breathing. It was wrong. The rhythm was wrong, short, compensating, the breathing of someone whose body was trying to work around an obstruction. His neck veins were visibly distended even from 10 feet away. His skin had the particular grayish cast that she had seen before, the color that meant the window was open but closing. She knew what it was. She knew it with the certainty of someone who had seen it in conditions these hallway nurses had never trained for and hoped never to encounter. Tension pneumothorax. Building pressure collapsing the lung, shifting the heart. It killed methodically, with about as much hurry as it needed to have, and it was not going to wait for someone to figure out the right forms to fill out. The lead operator, big, bearded, a long smear of something dark across the left side of his jaw, came through the stairwell door last and immediately located Karen, who had appeared at the end of the hallway with Dr. Morrison behind her. "I need trauma 1, I need blood, O negative, and I need your best trauma nurse, right now," the man said. His voice was controlled in the particular way that volume wasn't needed when authority was absolute. "Sir, I need to explain to you that this facility is not equipped," Morrison began. "His lung is collapsing," the man said. "He has maybe 8 minutes. Where is your trauma 1? Morrison looked at Karen. Karen looked at the stretcher. Neither of them moved toward it. Reyes looked at the young man on the stretcher. His lips had taken on a faint bluish tinge. The distension in his neck veins had worsened in the 30 seconds since they'd come through the door. She moved before she made a decision. That was the thing about muscle memory that nobody warned you about. It didn't ask, it just went. She walked to the stretcher and put 2 fingers on the young man's trachea. Deviated, shifted left. "Bay 1, she said. Her voice came out the way it used to, clear and no louder than it needed to be. "Move him now." The operators looked at her. The lead one, she read the name tape on his chest, Sorensen, looked at her hands, then at her face. "Who are you?" he said. "Someone who knows what's happening to him. Bay 1, now. I need a 14 gauge needle, 3.25 centimeters, and someone who won't get in my way." Sorensen looked at her for exactly 1 more second. Then he nodded at his men and they moved. Karen stepped into her path. "You're a float nurse. You're not authorized to." Reyes looked at her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Get me the needle," she said, "or step aside and let someone else." Karen got the needle. The young soldier's name tape read Castillo. She learned that as they moved him into Bay 1, and she cut his tactical shirt away with trauma shears, the fabric stiff with sweat and grit, and something she didn't examine. He was unconscious, which was the only mercy available at the moment, because what she was about to do was not a procedure that benefited from the patient's awareness. She found the second intercostal space. She measured the distance from the clavicle with her fingers the way she had done in forward operating positions, where there was no measurement tape and no time to look for one. His skin was cold. He was shunting blood to his core. "Hold him," she said. Sorensen and another operator stepped to the sides of the gurney and held. She drove the needle in. The decompression was immediate, a rush of air through the catheter, the pressure releasing. The physics of the thing correcting itself the way a balloon deflates when you pull the plug. She heard the change in his breathing before she saw it. The short, compensating rhythm eased. His chest expanded differently. She taped the catheter, watched his color for 10 seconds, and felt the specific, exhausting clarity of a thing going right after threatening to go wrong. "OSATs are coming up," Danny said from the monitor. She had appeared at some point in the last 2 minutes and stationed herself at the equipment without being asked. Her voice was steady. Reyes made a note of that. "It's a bridge," Reyes said. She pulled on a fresh pair of gloves. "He needs a chest tube. The needle will hold for 20 minutes maybe. Is there a surgeon in this building?" Morrison, who had been standing at the edge of the room watching with his arms slightly away from his sides like a man who had walked into a party and wasn't sure whose it was, straightened up. Yes, I can place a chest tube." "Then place it," Reyes said, stepping back to make room. "5th intercostal, mid-axillary. He'll need blood. That arm dressing is compensated, not resolved. Morrison moved to the bedside. He was not a trauma surgeon, but he was competent, and he was no longer frozen. And competent and not frozen was enough for the next 20 minutes. Reyes pulled off her gloves and stepped back. The room was full of noise now. Monitors, the controlled voices of Morrison directing Danny, the low radio chatter from Sorensen's shoulder, the sound of the second helicopter outside cycling down. Reyes moved to the periphery and stood with her back against the wall, watching Castillo's OSATs climb on the monitor screen. 78, 83, 87. Her hands were shaking. She put them in the pockets of her scrubs. Sorensen appeared beside her. He was quieter than a man his size had any right to be. He stood next to her and watched Morrison work and didn't say anything for a moment. "Reyes," he said finally. She looked at him. He was looking at the monitor, not at her. His jaw was set, the muscles working slightly. He had the eyes of someone running calculations that had nothing to do with the room they were standing in. "How did you know?" he said. "The tracheal deviation, the neck veins, the breathing pattern. Most nurses in a hospital like this wouldn't have caught it that fast." "I know." He let that sit for a moment. "You've been here 11 weeks, he said. She looked at him more carefully. "You've been looking. Since Fort Bragg told us there was a nurse named Reyes at St. Augustine with an 8-month gap on her employment record and a combat medical certificate that she didn't put on her application." He paused. "It wasn't hard. You're not as invisible as you think." Reyes looked back at the monitor. 91, 93. "I'm not reconactual anymore," she said. "I'm a float nurse. I move patients between floors and I restock linen carts and I go home at the end of my shift. Castillo would be dead in 4 minutes if that's all you were." "He's not dead. Dr. Morrison is placing the tube. You don't need me." Sorensen finally turned to look at her directly. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face, not just fatigue, but the layered kind. The kind that accumulated over deployments and decisions and men you couldn't carry out. She knew what it looked like because she saw it in mirrors. "The unit lost its senior medic 8 weeks ago," he said. His voice didn't change when he said it. That was the worst part. The voice not changing. "Breck. You knew him." She had known Breck. She did not say anything. "We've been operating short since. The brass says we have a replacement coming, but the replacement coming is 26 years old and has done 1 deployment and hasn't seen anything like what we work in." He looked back at Castillo. Today was supposed to be a low-risk extraction, turned into something else about 14 minutes in. "It always does," Reyes said. "Yeah." He reached into the pocket of his plate carrier and pulled something out. Set it on the crash cart beside her without comment or ceremony. It was a small patch, subdued gray and black. The unit insignia she had worn for 4 years, the one she had left on a table at Bragg the day she signed her separation papers. She didn't touch it. "We're not asking you to come back," Sorensen said. "I want to be clear about that. That's not why I came in here." "Then why?" "Because Castillo's going to wake up in a few hours in a hospital he's never been in, and the first thing he's going to want to know is who kept him breathing." He looked at her. He deserves to know it was someone who understood what she was doing, not just someone who got lucky with a needle. Reyes was quiet for a moment. The monitor showed 96. Morrison had the chest tube placed, the drainage system connected, dark fluid moving through the tubing and into the collection chamber. Castillo's color was improving. His breathing was even. He was going to make it through the next hour, which was the only guarantee anyone ever had in this work. "Tell him it was a float nurse," she said. "Tell him she's not even supposed to be in trauma. Tell him she's going to bill the army for a pair of scrubs." Something shifted in Sorensen's expression. Not a smile exactly. Something that lived in the same neighborhood. "You want to come see him when he's awake?" he said. "You don't have to. I'm not." "No." She said it quietly. without anger. The way you say a thing you've thought about enough that the emotion has worn smooth. I made a choice about what I am now. I need it to stay that way. Sorensen looked at her for a moment longer, then nodded once. He reached over and picked the patch back up from the crash cart, and she thought he was going to put it away, but instead he set it down again on the small shelf beside the monitor, on Castillo's side, not hers. For when he wakes up, he said, so he knows someone from the unit was here. He straightened up, reached over and briefly once, pressed 2 fingers to the frame of the monitor the way you touch a thing when you don't have language for what you want to say. Then he walked back to his men, and she heard them talking in low voices, the cadence of people shifting from crisis to the administrative machinery that followed crisis, calls to make, reports to file, a young soldier to transport to an actual trauma center once he was stable enough to move. She stayed where she was until Morrison confirmed the chest tube output was within range, and Danny had the monitoring under control and the room had settled from emergency into the lower register of serious but stable. Then she walked out. Karen was at the charge desk. She didn't say anything as Reyes passed. Her expression was the specific combination of humbled and resentful that produced silence in people who would otherwise have plenty to say. Reyes went to the bathroom at the end of the hall. She ran cold water over her wrists, the inside of them where the pulse was, the way she had learned to do when adrenaline needed somewhere to go. She looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. Same face, same eyes. Same 11 weeks of careful, deliberate, constructed invisibility. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. She dried them on a paper towel and dropped it in the trash and walked back out into the hallway. The helicopters were gone. She hadn't heard them leave, which meant she had been in the bathroom longer than she thought, which meant she had been standing at that sink looking at her own face for longer than she intended. The second-floor hallway was quiet. Phil was at the desk doing charting. Danny was walking out of Bay 1 with a full sharps container, and she looked up when Reyes came back, and the look on her face was the same look that Gerald had when he talked about Marlene. It was the look of someone who wanted to say something and knew they didn't quite have the words for it. They left something, Danny said. On the counter in Bay 1. One of the men left it. I know, Reyes said. Do you want me to? Leave it there, Reyes said, for the patient. She stopped at the linen cart outside Bay 2. She had not finished restocking it before the helicopters came. She picked up where she had left off, counting out pillowcases, stacking them in the right order, the work of her hands mechanical and familiar and exactly as ordinary as she needed it to be. Phil cleared his throat from the desk. Karen said you're still on transport for the afternoon. There's a patient on 3 that needs to go to imaging. I'll go in a minute, Reyes said. She finished the pillowcases. She straightened the cart. She stood still for a moment with her hands resting on the cool metal edge of it, looking down the long, bright, humming hallway. Then she went to get Gerald. I keep thinking about the linen cart. Not the helicopters. Not the needle. Not Sorensen's face when he set that patch down on the crash cart and walked away without asking for anything in return. I keep thinking about Reyes going back to that linen cart afterward, counting out pillowcases, straightening stacks, finishing a task that had been interrupted by something enormous, and then simply continuing as if the two things were not separated by an unbridgeable distance. That's the part that stays with me, because I think most of us, in that moment, would have needed something. Recognition, a conversation, a sign that the world had registered what just happened. And Reyes went back to the pillowcases. There's a kind of integrity in that which I don't think has a clean name. It's not humility exactly. Humility implies you don't know your own worth, and Reyes knew precisely what she was worth. She had spent years measuring it in decisions that cost something. It's more like she had separated her identity from the need to have her identity confirmed by other people. What she did in Bay 1 wasn't for Karen. It wasn't for Morrison. It wasn't even really for Sorensen. It was because a young man named Castillo was dying and she was the person in the room who could stop it, and that was the only math that mattered. I think about what it takes to build that kind of clarity, not just the skill. The skill is years of training, repetition, the brutal education of working in conditions where getting it wrong means someone doesn't come home, but the clarity about when to use the skill, about what it's actually for, that takes something different. It takes having thought hard about who you are underneath the role you play. Reyes had done that thinking. She had done it in a bathroom at Landstuhl, and on a drive past 4 hospitals, and in 11 weeks of restocking carts and moving patients between floors. She had earned her own understanding of herself, which meant that when the moment came, she didn't have to figure out who she was. She already knew. And then there's the part that breaks my heart a little, the part I think about most honestly at 2 in the morning when I'm being truthful with myself. Reyes was never invisible. She was never just a filler. She caught what the resident missed in the first hour. She showed Danny the pressure technique without making her feel small. She listened to Gerald's story about Marlene 3 times and understood what it was really about. The invisibility was never real. Karen just wasn't paying attention. How many times do we do that to people around us? How many times do we look through someone instead of at them because they arrived in the wrong packaging, with the wrong title, without the paper credentials that tell us we're allowed to take them seriously? Castillo almost died, not because the knowledge wasn't in the room. It was in the room the whole time. He almost died because the people with the authority to act weren't looking at the person who had the knowledge to save him. What Reyes did required nerve that most people will never be tested on. But what she also did, every single day before those helicopters landed, required something quieter and maybe harder to sustain. She showed up. She did the work in front of her with full attention, even when the work was beneath her training, even when nobody was watching, even when Karen called her a filler to her face. She didn't let the smallness of how she was treated make her small. That's the thing I want to carry with me. Not the dramatic version, not the needle and the decompression and Sorensen stepping back when she said move. The ordinary version. The pillowcases. The granola bar she threw away. Gerald and Marlene. Danny learning the pressure technique. The extraordinary thing Reyes did was possible because of who she was on every unremarkable day before it.